Good podcasts tell amazing stories, and good podcasters tell their story.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here. I am Chris, and this is Podtastic Audio, the show which I've designed and created to help you and all your podcast buddies too, make an amazing podcast for you and your audience. That's what Podtastic Audio is all about. As you are hearing this episode right now, live as it comes out, I am currently in New York City. That is on the other side of the country from where I am from. New York City in the middle of Manhattan. And one of the best parts about being right here in New York City is that they have some of the best pizza anywhere in the world. It's like world famous pizza. I absolutely love pizza, but I know that not everybody loves all the different varieties of pizza, especially out here in New York. They really kind of frown upon it when you order a Hawaiian pizza here in New York City. They don't seem to really like it that much. They really love their basic, mushroom, pepperoni, and sausage and things of that sort. But it is very, very good. The reason why I love pizza so much is probably because I used to work at a pizza place. The first job I had, right in the tail end of high school as I went into college, during that whole time span, was I actually worked at a pizza place in the town that I lived in. That pizza joint was called, ready for this? Wanna Pizza. That's right. It was called Wanna Pizza, as if you want a pizza. I don't get it. I didn't name it. I didn't own the place, but that's who I worked for, was Wanna Pizza. And I did delivery driving and made amazing money in tips. Well, I thought it was amazing money back then because it was such a long time ago. But I also worked a little bit in the kitchen. I got to see how literally the pizza was physically made, from the dough to the sauce to how they layered the pizza with toppings to how we physically made the cheese. I made the cheese in the back. I got the dough ready. I helped deliver stuff, box stuff. I took care of a lot of things. One thing I did not do was the register side. The owner's son was the one that really kind of handled all the cash and money stuff. But my job there was delivery driver. So I used my own pickup truck, which I had purchased with my own money, and I filled it with my own gas money, and I delivered pizzas all around town. Now, I made a few bucks here and there. I think looking back on it all, I didn't make very much money, at least compared to today's standard. But back then, I made enough to where I could afford a car payment, a used car payment, gas money, and any other fun money that any regular 18-year-old would love to have. The good old days of working at the old pizza joint. Man, I miss those days. Well, not really. So this is episode 2 in a 3-part series on what makes a really good podcast. And we are talking all about storytelling. And today, we're going to talk about how you can use your very own personal storytelling to gravitate towards your audience, make your show relatable to your audience, make your show something that they physically care about, that they want to get connected with. Now, when it comes to authenticity and relatability with your own personal storytelling, there are 3 key points we got to cover today. The very first one is an absolute big one, and that is the role of authenticity. I've been hearing this a lot in the podcasting space when it comes to creating a good podcast, because that's what we really want to do, is create a really good podcast. I keep hearing authentic. Everybody keeps saying your show has to be authentic. Well, if you're telling really good stories that are personal, that are truly authentic, what you're really going to do is you're going to build trust with your audience. If you think of your podcast like a business, and with any business, if you want to get a customer in the door, aka a listener, they're going to do business with people and places they know, like, and trust. And a really good way to get someone to trust you is to be authentic. And while you're sharing those authentic stories that come directly from you because they're your real life experiences, things that you know and I don't know because you're going to share them with us. That will lead to genuine connections with your audience by sharing real life experiences that you have gone through. Not me, not anybody else, your own personal experiences. The audience is more likely to perk up and listen to what you're saying when you're telling an actual genuine story. And on that story, it's best that you have complete transparency about being open about maybe your successes and maybe your failures, because people love a good story. I've said this in the last episode. Good storytelling will keep the listeners coming in and listening all the way through because you want to know what happens at the end. And this is especially true for your own podcast. Your podcast is your own show. Your listeners are coming into your podcast to hear from you. If you can tell them more things about you and about the struggles and triumphs of things that you have been through, they will definitely appreciate hearing from that. And that makes a good podcast. And the second way of using personal stories to make sure your podcast is definitely a good one is that your story is actually relatable to your audience. And this is where knowing who your audience is comes in handy. Because if you know exactly who your audience is, what they need, how you can tell your story to help them, that's what it's all about. Telling your story to help them out, help them learn from something, benefit from something. If you know who your audience is, you can craft your story directly for them and they will absolutely love you for it. They will say, wow, this podcast gets me. This podcast is making a story or telling me a story that I want to hear because I'm going through something very similar to that. If you're doing a podcast about, let's say, pizza, because I'm here in New York City, if you do your pizza podcast, you can tell amazing stories about ways you burnt your pizza and how you had to fix it. Like the time that I accidentally dropped the pizza on the floor and served it anyways. Oops, things like that. Those are stories you are not going to hear anywhere else. They are your stories coming directly from you, and that makes a really good podcast. But hey, I get it. Maybe you don't really want to tell your own personal stories. Maybe you got things to hide, skeletons in the closet. Hey, we all got them. It's okay. You don't have to share those stories, but stories that really resonate directly with your audience. Now, how do you physically do that? Here are the practical tips for authentic storytelling. Now, the key word here is authentic. Well, the very first thing you got to do is be yourself. Yeah, I know it sounds easier said than done. Just be yourself. Don't try to be somebody you're not, because your audience is going to see right past that. If you are trying to be a phony, a fake, or maybe you're trying to like mimic somebody else, I know that's big in the indie podcasting space where somebody will physically like see a show they like and they'll try to like replicate their own version of it, almost a knockoff version of somebody else's show. And nobody wants to hear that, because be yourself, be authentic, be original. And these techniques will help maintain your authentic voice within your own storytelling about your own stuff. Hey, speaking of being yourself, one thing you have to really focus on is how you talk to your audience. If it's just you and a microphone doing a monologue and just reading a script for a line one by one, that's kind of boring. It doesn't really add any inflections, any emotions, and especially it does not add any conversational language to keep it real. And that's what you want. If you want to tell a really good story, you got to make sure it sounds real by using engaging dialogues. And last but not least, telling good personal stories about you that resonate with your audience. Well, that audience could give you some personal feedback, and what you do with that feedback is really up to you, but you can weave some of that feedback directly into your story. Hey, you can podcast about whatever you want, however you want to do it. But I'm telling you that right now, if you want a good podcast, and I mean a good podcast, Add in some authentic storytelling that is personal, that comes from you, not about somebody else, but I'm talking about you personally. And maybe you don't know what those stories possibly could be or the things that you feel comfortable sharing on your podcast. Hey, I get it. I totally do. I totally understand. And it's hard to go really deep into your own personal stories and share them out into the world for everybody to know about and hear about. But trust me, this will help you and your audience build that true foundation, a true relationship between you and them. And that is what it's really all about. Because once you have that bridge, once you have that connection, the audience is going to want to know more about you and they're going to care more about you. Because the things you talk about are things they care about and are personal to them and to you. If you share a story that resonates directly with your audience and they're like, yeah, I've gone through something like that, or I'm going through something like that, I'm curious to find out how you overcame it. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you have a good podcast. And what makes a good podcast? That's really good storytelling, unique and authentic storytelling. Stories you are not going to hear anywhere else from anybody else because your stories are from you. They're the things you've gone through, not somebody else, but you personally. And whatever your road is that got you here today is different than my road and from somebody else's road. Well, I'm going to finish up enjoying my trip here in New York City, but on the very next episode, I'm going to go over the ways on how you can craft and share your own personal, unique stories that resonate directly with that audience. And until then, happy podcasting.